apply to the work of our ADO and economic development partners in the room. And Scott, International Economic Development Council, one of the ways we came into contact with you was your research on how economic developers can use technology and leverage that for our work, and you're published. So we're really excited to invite both the micro and the macro facets converging on AI in this great space today. So to start off, how about an invitation to each of you to introduce yourselves, a little bit about you as a person and what your organization does. Maybe we can start with Scott.
Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. I'm Scott Brown, Research Associate at IADC. So white papers, publications like the one Jen mentioned, and this was all about not just AI but also extended reality. So all the different trends happening in tech that will impact not just the field of economic development and industries, but also the day-to-day profession. And on your way in, you might have seen a QR code, so definitely check out that paper. And we'll have a few more papers coming out about what next level or high performing economic development organizations are doing. So a little bit about IADC. So we are the largest member association for economic developers with over 4,500 members, mostly in North America, but we have other global reach as well.
Excellent. David Schiff. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of WEDA. If you go to read.ai, you'll be able to see what it's about. Very high level, what we do is we join your Zoom call, your Google Meet call, your Microsoft Teams call, and then we go in and we measure that call. And the way we measure that call is a little bit different from what you've heard about Copilot. We will look at what is being said, but we will also look at how people react to the things that are being said. So if you're ever on a call and they start to talk about, hey, I'm from Seattle, how's the weather there? I'm from Nevada, how's the weather there? Half the people are checked out, looking at their phone, they're looking away. You can see their eyes scanning the website. We'll be able to actually, we are able to actually identify when someone is and isn't engaged. And then when you actually layer that into the transcript, you can actually create a better summary. So now you're able to go in and say, this is almost like an editorial or a narration where you can say, David said this, but nobody cared. And so you're able to actually score not just the words that are said, but how people react. And the benefit there is it creates better notes. Because if you just went in and said, let's say I try to sell you something. And I say, hey, we're the greatest, we do X, Y, and Z, we'll save you 400 hours a year, blah, blah, blah. Your eyes get glazed over. Well, if you just run it through something like ChatGPT or Copilot, it might go in and say, hey, this is the best call ever. You need to buy this right away because everything was good. Versus if everybody on the call checked out, the camera was on and they turned it off, people started going on mute. We call that ghost mode, where it's like your camera is off, you're on mute, no one knows you're actually there. That will go in and actually say, this wasn't a good call. This wasn't an effective use of time. And so that's what we're doing today. It's available for free if you ever want to try it. And then prior to that, I'm Seattle based. I started Placed back in 2011, focused on location analytics. Madrona Venture Group funded that. We sold that to Snapchat in 2017. In 2019, we spun that out and joined Foursquare, and it was really location analytics. And from 2019 to about 2020, I was CEO of Foursquare.
Committee for bringing in some riveting, fascinating speakers, and thank you both for those introductions. So AI is coming at us pretty quickly. Could you share maybe one of your first exposures to AI, and then what are some of the fundamental perspectives of AI that have led you to invest in learning more about this field?
Sure. First experience of AI was at Reed was really, we looked at video and we tried to understand, can you actually generate a score or a response based on the way the facial reactions were going, where they were looking, etc. And if you look at the early days, there was a lot of like cameras, casinos, shoplifting, all this stuff that goes out there. You can see like, are people engaged or not? But there are still images, so they're really blurry images. When COVID happened in 2020, we started to go in and say, now everybody's on a video camera. I can see them 24/7. Can you actually go in and take that information and start to score that to say engaged, disengaged, happy, sad, etc. And so that's where we kind of really started to dive in. And this was before ChatGPT came out. And we said, this is kind of interesting. You can see these tick by tick information. We went out to market. We were one of the featured apps on Zoom. What we found out was people really didn't care. There wasn't a use case for that as a standalone. You actually had to combine it with something else. And so for us, that was the first interaction with that. But then as we started to stack other things on top of it, it really use case.
So I probably have a more typical coming to awareness of AI. So my background's a lot in data, so coding, data analysis, data sets. And my first real exposure to this generative AI that we just saw a presentation on, it was to generate code. And it saved me literally hours of work. And like, I don't know all the syntax and the grammar in R or Sage or whatever software I'm using, but like ChatGPT and all those other options, they do. So it was an amazing leap forward, and it sort of turned me on to all these different products and how they work. And that's sort of how I came to be, a little expert on this little niche field of AI within economic development and just workplace productivity in general.
That's amazing. So we looked around the room and can everyone show their hands if you're using AI for personal or work purposes or have tried it, had a sampler? And who's used it on your office computer? Okay. Who has an organizational policy on AI? Okay. So that's a little bit of a lead-in and a little bit of a we're not going to. I don't think AI is activated in a way that just charted that. So, you're not employing David's information right now. But can I invite you each to share a little bit about awareness that we as economic developers can have about some of the risks?
Yeah, so there's a question about DEI, and it raises the bigger question of how generative AI gives you the answer it gives. And the answer is, unfortunately, we sort of don't know. They call it the black box problem. And basically, you can tell ChatGPT what you want, but you don't actually know how it works internally and spits out the result. So you might have seen recently Google had Gemini putting out strange images. Have you heard about this? So basically, like if you ask for an image, historically accurate image of a founding of the U.S., it would spit out an image of Black men, Black women, Indian men, Indian women. And it was like, that's very interesting. Why? And some people sort of said, oh, it's, Google being woke, and they made it like a culture war thing. But it really pointed to, we don't exactly know that when we give AI instructions, what it will spit out, right? So it's just a much larger problem that we will encounter in AI. So the end point of it is we can't blindly trust what it puts out. And that we have to be aware of the biases that go into it and how it's going to be reflected coming out. And a lot of the times it's really opaque and it can be very strange to us. So that's the risk. Be cautious and think about what the bias might look like tangibly if you can.
I think the biggest risk from a business standpoint is you decide not to do something about it. So we talked about the hands raised where you have a policy versus everyone is using it right now. It's very much like when smartphones first came out and people were questioning like, hey, can I actually check my email on my smartphone or not? That was a common question. Can I look at work documents on my smartphone? Can I do text on my smartphone? Like all of those things came up, and there were policies for 3-4 years in a lot of cases. There still aren't policies in a lot of places. But what's happening is everybody is using it. In this room, it seems like everyone was using it. And what's going to happen is if you don't actually put policies in place, it's going to run free. At some point, you're going to do something with the data where it got contributed into a model and got exposed. Those things can be prevented as long as you adopt it now. And there is no question, this is the fastest adoption of technology at the corporate, at the individual level that I've ever seen. If you look single software report that comes out with something technology, everything is AI-based. So when it comes down to it, I think it's going to be critical to go in and say, I need to do this now. This is not something I can punt down the road. And I need to go in and establish beginning best practices and then start to go in and say, what else can I do on top of it?
Can I add on? So I've heard about some organizations trying to pump their brakes on it. You know, they're very cautious about what David's describing. So they say, don't use tools. We don't really know what it's going to spit out for us. And to that, I would say people are still going to use it, first of all. So it's better to be transparent about that and try to collaborate. So like talk about prompt engineering. How do you talk to it? What has given you the best results? To not shy away from those issues, but to try to codify some sort of guideline of how to use it. So don't shy away from it.
Could we peel just another layer of that onion off and say if there were top 3 things that we could each take home to tell our teams about the parameters for employing AI, what would that look like?
I would say the first thing you should have is with any solution you use, startups, big companies, that you do not train against my data without my data. So this goes in and says, if you contribute data into the system, what can easily happen is they'll use that data and they'll start to train the models against it. Not specifically for you, but it's just part of the overall process. More data comes in, the better the models become. You can go in and check a box in the system and opt out. Like every major system and smaller startups do allow you to do that. So that's one thing to just keep in mind is make sure who owns the data, who can do what with the data. I would say the second thing is have a process of where you just know what they are using. So even if you don't have a policy to say these are the approved list, you could go in and say, let me start to keep track of what is being used. So you can prevent something where it's all of a sudden something comes out in the news. You can say, hey, this is kind of questionable. We shouldn't be using this, or there's a better standard here. We should use this large company solution. Or let's not use this large company solution because it's gotten some backlash and we don't want to be utilizing that. But having that list is going to be important because if you remember, there's some folks here that are probably the same age as me, maybe older. These people install anything on their computer, and all of a sudden it got really slow. You have keyloggers, you have the browsers where you had all these extensions, and it's like, what's going on? That is what's going to happen if you do not start to keep track of what your team is using from a kind of macro view. You don't want to scare them. It's just more like, let us keep track and let us start to see, oh, this is really interesting. So here's an example. We've had one company that went from 1 license to 200 licenses, 3 licenses to go in and use our product in a matter of 2 weeks. And then all of a sudden, they started telling their managers, et cetera, use this. And then they came to us and said, hey, we want to get a corporate license. We need the X, Y, and Z in place. So that transparency just let you lock that in.
And what David's describing sort of sounds like rushing in. So if you are looking to adopt different AI tools, don't feel the pressure to be an early adopter if you're not sold benefits or you're uncertain of other unintended consequences. And the other thing I would say is that you have to treat your technology not as overhead, right? It's often thought of as just a line in your budget, an afterthought. It's just something you have, but you have to dedicate an equal amount of thought and strategy into those decisions, and allot time to play around with those tools and prototype before you make any decisions.
All great feedback. Washington State has a long legacy of being a manufacturing state, a trade exporting positive state. And can I ask you each to share a little bit about how you think Washington is positioning itself to capitalize on AI, or for David, how the state has an ecosystem that has enabled your startup to take flight?
Yeah, from the ecosystem perspective, Washington's great. You got Microsoft here, you've got Google, Facebook. Everyone has an office here. From the venture community, so this is investment dollars in startups. It's very positive right now in the market. If you go to a website like called GeekWire, you can see every single day multiple AI companies are starting to get funded. Now, is it as big as Silicon Valley? No. But is it comparable to New York? Is it comparable to LA? Absolutely. And I think there is a bigger opportunity with the next generation of the Microsofts, the Googles, the Facebooks will come from somewhere, and we're really set up well in Washington State to do that. And I'm excited about that specifically. I think from a government perspective, we are starting to see more government organizations actually start to use it, including Washington State. Now, it's kind of interesting. We use it. It's like, okay, now we have to go through this vetting process, and we have to answer these questions. All fine to do. But the use cases are really interesting where it's like, I never designed reads to do that. So here's an example of a state south. They're using us right now. They're going to roll it out to about 4,000 kind of employees, but they have teams that go out in the field. This is for elder care, this is for child protection, etc. And they typically take notes during the meetings. Sometimes they'll take out the recorder and they'll record the conversation. Well, now what they're doing is they're going in and taking that recorder and they're uploading it to read, and we're creating a report that says, here's the summary of the interaction, here are the action items, here are the next steps. And they're using that to then track across time that interaction with that client. And they're able to just go in and cut and paste that report. Boom, you're done. Like that saves 20% of their time during a week. You can say, we don't need to do that. And states love that because it frees up resources to do what's more important. What's more important, taking notes or actually interacting with the clients and people on the ground?
Scott, you have the national perspective of how different states and geographies are leaning into this technology. We'd love to invite your insights.
Yeah, I actually want to zoom into what different industries are doing. So as a preface, we've been talking a lot about general AI, right? So you feed it a lot of data and you can interact with it along a number of topics, whether it's taking notes or asking about the summary of Washington's economy. But there are more niche or narrow types of AI that are being applied across industries. So I heard a lot last night at the info about agriculture and the importance of it in Washington's economy. So there are all sorts of initiatives to use AI. So you can use satellite to real time detect conditions. You can even detect insects like aphids, right, in soybean crops. So you can speak to financial benefits of doing that, as well as just resource conservation. And you mentioned, Jen, manufacturing, so digital twins. So there was an article from the MIT Tech Review about the use of digital twins. So when I say digital twin, I mean a digital model, real world item. So instead of creating a physical wind turbine, for example, you can create a digital model and simulate different versions of it. So you can see, does it fail under XYZ conditions? So basically, it is cost cutting, it improves the efficiency of resources, finance, and basically you can cut and paste, these applications to other industries, right? So whether it's manufacturing, ag tech, education, urban planning. There was a city in Japan that deployed AR headsets, or AR augmented reality. So interacting with the real world, but also with digital models. So you can walk down the street and literally move buildings around and experience it. So it has gained unique insights for urban planners. So you have to look for how AI is going to impact particular industries because it's really what it can do.
A little hometown pride. We have a biotech company that is employing AI for synthetic bio and cancer research, and just signed a major deal with AstraZeneca. The company's Absci. But just as you're speaking about that, probably all around us, companies are and have been exploring AI and digging into it. So a great opportunity for us to find those stories and tell the stories about how Washington State is being relevant and being modern and is still an amazing leader in technology. We talked a little bit about cognitive bias and sort of the negative affirmations of if we can't blindly trust what the algorithms are feeding us. But we also talk a little bit about inclusivity and the opportunity for AI to be deployed in our workforces and across our economy in ways that are bringing us together.
So we have a couple things, and it wasn't originally the intent, but this is an interesting use case. So we have a metric called bias. So I'm on a call, how I react to somebody else is speaking to me. So talking about something, I start looking like this, or I start to frown, or I get like a kind of mean looking face. I'm like, oh, this sucks. When I do those things, I might not recognize this. And a lot of managers, a lot of coworkers, peers, are like, oh, that's just David. He's just the way that he is. Don't worry about it. But it actually does create a negative reputation. It creates these biases that you don't know. And I will say, most people don't want to be biased. Most people don't want people to think they're angry at them, they're annoyed, they're disengaged. Well, we've got this tab called coaching. And in the coaching, we actually show where you're missed, where what meetings where you weren't paying attention, where was it a specific person? Was it a specific person that you weren't listening to? You're like, oh, this is bad. I did not know that. And so people are starting to look at this on a regular basis because it's not going in and saying what they were thinking, because we don't read your mind, but it's going in and saying, you look like this. And so it's really like you watch Seinfeld, it's like resting face. And it's like, my resting face is low. And I need to know that it's a low resting face because I don't want people to think I don't like them, I'm disengaged, I don't care about it. But I will say, you're but I think that conversation that you have with the manager, that is really hard to do, where they go in and say, you're doing this and this, and you're like, I'm defensive, I don't believe you, this is totally wrong. But when you can actually see it on a call and you play the video and you say, oh, yeah, I totally see that is actually a real benefit of AI. So just like you have a Blue Band, a Fitbit, you work you got your Fit app on your phone, that's the same thing for AI. It is going to improve the way that you interact with people because it's giving you data directly, but it's not going to say, hey, you should be running a little bit more. Hey, maybe you should take some more steps. If someone told me that, I'm like, shh. But if it's like, hey, just go up another walk, take another 2,000 steps, I'm like, yeah, I guess I can just take that.
That is disturbing, fascinating. So when I think of DEI, specifically inclusion as it comes to DEI, AI, many acronyms. So have you ever heard FOMO? Yes. Have you heard of FOMO as well? So some people say yes, it's the fear of becoming obsolete. So I think this is going to be one of the biggest lines of equity work as we move forward with AI, because a lot of people are going to fear for their jobs about displacement. That, like, for example, we talked about coding. If you built your career on coding as what you do, they will be a little scared because they could be replaced very quickly. So I think as we implement AI solutions in workplaces, we have to think about the human experience of it. Because some people might be sort of fearful to be transparent about how they use it or how they would like to use it. So don't forget there's that human element as you're implementing AI. That's the biggest thing in equity for AI.
FOBO, I had not heard that, but yeah, that's something for us to think about. I did Scott a disservice. He has some visuals, and I don't know if they've been overtaken by dialogue, but if there's anything you want to pull up, I now have the clicker, and we can see that for you.
It's okay. It's really more for when the master slide deck is sent out. There's a link to the report that I mentioned, as well as some highlights from it. So yeah, definitely check it out. But we're covering a lot of topics here, so we're good. We're good.
Okay, so we'll have some homework, a couple of different things. So the LinkedIn AI 5-hour training certification. Has anybody taken that?
There are a lot of like certificates and courses and all this, so pick and choose. I have not done it though.
All right. Do we have any questions coming in? Oh, right away. I'm going to check the Snapchat, and in the meantime, Suzanne's got
So I'm Jennifer, Black Business Excellence and Difficult Consultant. So one of the things that you mentioned is something that I've dealt with in the past. For example, is your AI going to say, okay, this is a Black woman. She elevates her voice when she speaks. No, she's not angry. Of course she's not angry. She's using her hands, but of course she's not angry. So is it going to say, no, you're going to judge me based on the majority of folks that you think should not be doing all this stuff. So when you said it, I'm like, oh, this is another barrier. This is another way that this bias will be shown, because I do elevate my voice. I do use my hands. I'm doing it right now, but in an angry level. So I don't want your AI to be saying, you probably should stop using your hands. No, I want to be authentic. And so I'm just curious about that, because that, as soon as you said that, I laughed back when I think, before you answer that, I just want to say thank you for being here, because I do use Read AI and I'm excited to meet you. Thank you.
That is a great question, and a lot of people will answer to say, hey, we trained our models based on different races, colors, genders, ethnicities, voices, etc. And we did all that. But what we do that's a little bit different. Different companies will have different setups, but what we will do that's different is we will create a baseline during that call. So we'll have a generic model that goes and says, are they engaged or are they disengaged in real time? But after the call is done, we will actually create a baseline for you. So then we'll look for deviations that are above or below your baseline. So if you move your hands a little louder, you're going to be at a higher baseline here versus me. I have a low resting face, like I said, so I look angry all the time. It's not going to say like, hey, David is pissed at every single call. It's going to say, this is his resting face. And it actually gets more angry. It's like, that's how we got to do. That's what we're back to do. Is like, what do you train your models against? And for us, just for that call, going and saying each person is their own individual person, and we'll create a baseline.
That's the difference in having a man of color doing that thing.
That's a great question. Question in the middle, and as the mic makes its way to her, I'm checking the swap card, not because and the question came in from the audience. Can you talk about open source versus closed system applications? You know, as economic developers, we all have a strong commitment to client confidentiality, and would love to know where there are areas that might prohibit us from adopting it with respect to our client information.
Yeah, so there are models with generative AI that work on the machines, right? We heard a little bit of that from Michael. In those, I think you can generally feel safer putting in more sensitive or particular personal information. That said, I'm not confident enough to speak to like how open source models will take in personal information. So I do not want to provide any definitive answer that way. We can get Michael back here to talk about.
Yeah, from an open source versus closed source, there's not much difference from today because it's kind of wide open. I would say if you work with Azure with Microsoft, you work with Google, if you work with Amazon with AWS, those two as a device so lock scan your data. When it comes to open source software, yes, you can bring that in your systems, you can create your own servers, you can run that data. So it's not going into public entity. I think the biggest risk is that I understand the question is, should I put my data into ChatGPT? Should I put it into Copilot? Should I put it into X, Y, and Z? And most of those are actually pretty well protected where you don't have to worry about it. I think the harder one is going to be a lot of the startups that come out. So there's a company called Lemon where if you actually start talking and you ask a couple questions, you answer it back, it will replicate your voice with such a high level of accuracy, your mom won't know the difference. And so that is very straightforward to do. We have I have a company that I work with, Speech Labs. They will actually go in. You upload a YouTube video. We want to have different languages supported on Read so we can educate folks, but we don't have every language covered. And so what we did is we upload the video. It will go in and process it, and it will go in and actually dub it in Spanish in about 30 minutes for a 30-minute call. And that dubbing is not just like some random voice that sounds like a robot or something like that. It will actually take the tone of your voice in English, and then it will put it into Spanish. It'll give you Spanish tones where you'll start talking a little bit faster, so the video will go faster. It will match your lips to match the movement of the words that are being said. And that costs $2 for a video. So you're going to start to see all these opportunities, especially with businesses here in economic development, where you're talking about many different cultures, many different languages. It becomes actually easier to serve your community with AI.
How do you QA? Like, how do you know that it's doing it right?
Yeah, that's the hard part. The way that we did it is, I said a good friend of mine today. But I think over time, just at that point, it's just better. There are many cases where it's hallucinate. You'll get feedback pretty quickly from the audience that sees that and says, "Oh, this is actually really wrong." Starting to speak Chinese when they started in Spanish.
Call it, dial a friend. Lisa, go ahead with your question, please.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Lisa Smith. I'm with the Washington State Market Prize Association. And one of my heroes, D. Marlon Sisney, woke me up. And he's a young man of color who demystified this for me. And I am curious about your advice to the governor's council. He's a new advisory council on AI. What advice would you give to the governor? And then secondly, what do you think about perplexity? Because it cites what it produces in AI. I've fallen in love with it.
So advice in what way? Like, is there a particular?
Insights about how he and the state can do its best to protect citizens and businesses, but also beyond that, innovative edge for economic development.
So this sort of touches on regulation, right, which is sort of the Pandora's box or can of worms, whatever you want to call it right now. We can look to what some companies and governments have done. So the EU is looking at its risk matrix. So identifying, how high a risk is this to individual people's liberties, their well-being, and tries to identify where we should sort of say, whoa, we need to pause, or you can probably go ahead, but you need to demonstrate its rising for transparency. OpenAI sort of has a similar approach where they have their risk matrix and different thresholds, which sort of trigger different responses. But in terms of government regulation, it's sort of yet to be seen. There's been so many attempted bills in Congress, few initiatives at the state level. So I know in New York, their Department of Financial Services issued a, I don't know if it's an order, but a statement that for actuarial, for insurance, there has to be transparency on what variables insurers are using so that they are not unfairly discriminating in AI models to predict their risk level. So yeah, it's really hard to know whether governments will be able to keep up with the rate of change and how AI is being deployed. It doesn't answer the question of what I would like Washington or any other state to do, but it's really, really challenging. So thank you for that question.
And I would say for the governor's office would be like, one is disclosure, just setting up best practices across anybody who works in Washington State to say what's the right level of disclosure when AI is being used. Now, the wrong level of disclosure is everyone goes to a website, you see a cookie banner that says, hey, accept, reject, every single time. That's not the way it is. But you want to go in and say, hey, AI will be used in this case, so people are aware, and they can say, I don't want to use this product because AI is being used. But that level of disclosure is really important. Just like if you have your Apple phone and it wants to turn on the camera, you see that little same thing for Android. I think that's all you need. You don't need to make it so complicated, but you need an indication that is happening. So I'd say that's one. I think two is around the complexity question that you had. I think the citation is actually because it actually tells you when it hallucinates. You can say like, hey, you came up with this answer. Why did you come up with this answer? To see what actually happened. And that is going to be more important next year or two. But I think after that, it's going to be so good. You're not even going to have that citation. Because do you look for citation? No. Like, how did you decide this was the right? You just trusted at this point that it is going to give you the best result. So I agree. Short term, you want it. Long term, it's not going to be necessary.
From an infrastructure level, you shared about this a little bit about having 18 app integrations in your browser. When we think about different levels of internet accessibility across the state in terms of broadband, bandwidth, let alone our own individual devices, how burdensome or encumbering is AI on all of those systems as everybody's continuing to adopt it so quickly?
Yeah, on the system side, it's not that expensive from the consumer standpoint because you're uploading a video and it's all processed in the cloud. You're not going in and running ChatGPT locally. You're pushing it out. So broadband speed is incredibly important in what you do, email. But I think from a, do you need a bunch of hardware? No, you could actually have a cheap Android phone and you can start to use ChatGPT today. You can record a video and then upload it and start to edit it within the actual app because it's all done in the cloud. So I think that is less of a barrier than it's ever been. And I think it does kind of level the playing field where if someone is a first generation American, they can just run an email that they want to send to someone, run through and say, hey, can you correct my grammar and that I'm a native English speaker? Boom, you've got that sent out. And now all of a sudden it's like, hey, they can't tell the difference and it's actually leveled the playing field.
When I hear that question, I think about the digital divide. So will small businesses in rural areas be able to use these tools? And will they fall behind in trying to compete against these big businesses that have, these tools that can pay for even better models? So yeah, broadband is more important than ever now.
Thank you for that. Please.
Hi, my name is Jo Woods, and I am CEO and founder of NEMAS LLC. And that touches on my question. Technological advances of the past, these things have changed the tide of our society when we are looking at manual labor and low-income workers. But generative AI is now dealing with knowledge work and in professionals that have higher educations, higher wages. How do you guys think that that is going to affect our cultural society, and will it level the playing field?
This is not related to my company, but I think it will level the playing field a lot. Where what's going to happen is you can talk about like computer science engineers. They're highly paid. These folks, you get the right person, you can make $1 million, $2 million a year, and you're 10, 15 years out of school, like not a problem at all. Like working at Google, working at Facebook. But the problem is when there hasn't been any talent to actually do that job, so that price goes up. Just like you get a baseball player, basketball player, computer science engineer, same thing. But as that becomes easier and easier to do, that salary, you actually see that with the layoffs that are occurring with Twitter, where they got rid of 75% of their team, but they're still running. Like you can agree or disagree the way you want to run it, but they have 75% less people that's still running at the end of the day. And it's because of the tools that are available in the market today. And then I think what's going to happen is kind of the lower end of the market is going to go up, where physical labor becomes more important. The interactions with people in the real world become more important. The things on the internet you can't believe anymore because I can regenerate my voice, my face, all these things. It's going to be more about that in-person wear, and I think that's the community that does get hit a little bit more. And I think that will bridge that divide. Now, it's going to solve everything, but it is going to cover that gap a bit more. And it's going to let the folks down kind of in this group actually say, hey, I can type in, I want to send out an email that has this, this, and this, and it's going to generate the code and I can just upload it into the system. And I think you'll see that leveling of the playing field thanks to AI. And a lot of people, a lot of engineers are like, I don't know about this. It's gonna, I like the money that I make right now. I like the massage that's 4 o'clock. Those are all great things to have. And they're gonna lose some of that.
I agree with David overall. So recently the NVIDIA CEO was saying how don't encourage your kid to do coding. Have them, look at like farming. So this is like a couple days ago. And he was basically saying like, you don't need to necessarily be a high technical worker. What you really need to do is learn how to think creatively. So David was mentioning the humanness. So in the last, 20, 30 years, we have calibrated our universities to focus more on STEM than humanities. I'm personally a humanities guy. I love it. I don't regret it. I think we're going to see a resurgence of the importance of how to think creatively. We're going to invest more in social intelligence, emotional, because we can leave a lot of the technical stuff to machines. It's sort of like in Star Trek. One of the books on the table says it'll be like a Star Trek economy. I think that's the opposite view, but I think it is definitely a possibility.
Thank you.
We have one more question from a participant in the kind of on the wing here who's been so patient as we've scanned the audience and such amazing, engaging questions from everyone. As we talk about humanity and the mic makes its way across the room. I would just like to personally express how thankful I am to you each for being here. And to all of our WEDA board members who appreciate each other on the human level as we do the tough work of economic development and trying to drive great things for our community. So now the mic has made it across, and our last question.
The mic came on. Yeah, so Michael Katzi of the Public Utilities, and this is probably mostly a question to start. We've been talking about AI in general and other things, but one of the best, and I've been to a lot of good sessions at our ADC. One of the best I ever went to was recently in Dallas. It was a session on economic development organizations using AI to actually improve their processes. So getting back to us as a profession and us as professionals, there were some really impressive ways in which AI is being used. Chris Marshall and his group at GPEC and the other panelists. How can we learn, as most of us are probably not AI specialists and experts, how can we get to the point where we can start implementing a lot of those AI tools and procedures that they were doing, so that actually we can get better at what we do and be more efficient and effective? Because I've got a feeling those who don't adopt AI tools and AI mentality to economic development as practitioners, we're going to get there.
So the advice I would give for any EDO, think about your 2 or 3 top technological priorities. Actually, strikes technological from that. What are your biggest pain points in your work? What do you find yourself doing the most tediously? So a lot of EDOs, it's a lot of emails, a lot of CRM content. And thinking through what your daily workflow looks like and where you can improve it, or what would be the most bang for your buck, that's where you want to look for a few solutions tailored to that particular task or challenge. Because you don't want to rush and you don't want to also bite too much off, right? There are 1,000 things that you could possibly purchase, so many different products, and you have to sort of wade through all that, thinking about your strategic priorities. So start with the top 2 or 3 and move from there. That's the biggest advice I'll give.
All right. Well, please join me in lending a hand to this. We're going to take a little pause and reconvene just before 3 o'clock for the next session. Let's see if there are any other special notes. Oh, teaser. The next session is the WEDA Awards. So get on the edge of your seats.